welcome to the final session of this excellent Independent Schools show weekend. So I'm delighted to say that we're going out with a bang because we've got three fantastic heads from London and the home counties. We have Jessie Elzinga from Sevenoaks School. Jessie's been the headmaster there for coming up for just over a year, starting in September 2020. He has various aims, which I was about to articulate, but I'm not going to because they're going to come out in the questions. And we've got Jane Lunnon, who's the head of Alleyn. I always pronounce it wrong. In Dulwich, moved there in January 2021 from Wimbledon High School. Has a book, The State of Independence, published in 2019, and is also currently chair of the Teenage Mental Health Commission, which is very, very important work. And finally, we have Christopher Cockerill, who's joining us from Anchorage in Alaska and Surrey. He's now the head of Fulham School, but he was the director of sixth form at the North London Collegiate School, and he also taught at Sevenoaks, which brings this closing the loop, I think it's called. What we want to talk about is a subject that I'm very keen to discuss, which is what is going to happen to education in the future. I've got two teenage children currently at enormously expensive private schools, and in fact they're at the same school that I went to, and I muse on the fact that my university professor father and my journalist mother sent three children to the same private school, and that I as a politician and my wife as a lawyer are now struggling because of the high school fees, which we might discuss in a minute. But I'm also interested in what they're learning at school, because when I was a government minister, I commissioned a report in supporting the video games industry, which came out with the phrase that coding was the new Latin. And I wonder whether my children should be learning Latin or whether they should be doing coding. So that's another item that we can discuss. So let's kick off the discussion, starting with Jessie. And moving around. Are our children learning the right things? I don't get the feeling as a parent that the school curriculum is that much different from what it was 40 years ago. Am I being grotesquely unfair, or is that a question worth asking?
I think, is this working? Yes.
It is, but you've got to slightly shout into it.
Got to slightly, okay. I think schools are teaching the right things. I think independent schools here, one of the great things about being in independent schools is that you are free to teach the curriculum that you want to teach. So you can choose if you want to teach GCSEs or IGCSEs or a middle years program by the IB organization. You can also choose if you want to do IB or A levels, and then you can also develop your curriculum around those things. So at our school, we teach GCSEs and IGCSEs at 16 plus at Sevenoaks. We also have a middle school diploma that involves a course in critical thinking and doing independent research projects, so that we actually teach them beyond the syllabus and beyond the national curriculum. And then we teach the IB diploma in the sixth form, so they get a range of subjects. They do a course in critical thinking, they do independent research projects. And of course, we also really value co-curriculum. So sport, art, music, drama, debating, CCF, Duke of Edinburgh scheme, all of those co-curricular things, I think, actually, are part of what makes independent schools so special in this country. It shows what school and what education can be when it's properly funded, and all of those opportunities are available to students. I know there are some other people and some other heads who might push for more reforms to curriculum, but I actually quite like the way that the curriculum's set up. And I think as a parent going around to visit other schools, I would ask the head about their curriculum and to justify what they teach and why they teach them.
Jane.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for asking the question and for chairing, Ed. So I think the answer to that question is absolutely yes and no. And I suspect that's going to be the answer to many questions. I agree with Jessie that one of the great things about independence is that we have much more freedom to decide how we can set up our curriculum in order to meet the deficiencies that we might see elsewhere in the national curriculum. So I think rather like Jessie's school at Alleyn's, we have a metacognitive course, for example, that we run alongside that all of our children do. In that course, it's called the Alleyn's Learner Programme. There's opportunities to do lots of interdisciplinary learning, lots of critical thinking, lots of focus on research, problem solving across subjects. I do feel that there is a need now, perhaps a growing need in the world that we are all inhabiting, for much more focus on interdisciplinary learning. And I don't think our curriculum, as it is currently set up and framed in this country, lends itself to that particularly. And I also feel, and I'm sure we'll come on to this, I think there are two areas that I think are utterly critical. We are in a digital revolution. It is enormously exciting. I think we should be doing more in our curriculum around that, and also in terms of the way that we are enabling our children to learn. So I'd be very surprised if everybody on this panel doesn't have a scenario where their children bring devices, laptops into class, but that should be standard, in my view, across the country. I really think that the partnership, connection, opportunities available when children are able to access web-enabled devices in the classroom are enormous. That's not about getting rid of traditional methods, it's just simply about supplementing them. And I absolutely do think that every child should leave school knowing how to code. They should learn to be creators of the digital environment, not just consumers of it. So I think that should be prioritized. And my final point, and I'm sure we will come to this, is how we educate children for a sustainable future. So I was fortunate enough to be speaking at COP the other day, and the big question is, how do we educate our children to be prepared to deal with the climate solutions that they're going to need to find? And again, I don't think that is front and center in the national curriculum in the way that it needs to be.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Jane. And you a few curtain raisers there for what we're going to discuss further down the line. Chris.
Thank you very much, and good evening, good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here. In terms of the curriculum, I completely echo exactly everything that Jane has just said. I think the correct answer is yes and no. Standard classical education is tried and tested. It's been working for a very long time, and it's shown to have inherent value in terms of what we do to develop children in just the right way. We are living in a time where either intentionally or inadvertently, a lot of changes have been brought about very suddenly, where there's a lot of revolution. There are new technologies around AI, around robotics, around fintech. The government is talking about skills gaps in terms of preparing students for employability. And I do think that up the upper end of secondary education and at university, more focus needs to be given around employability and ensuring that students have got that there. I do think that schools do have a reflective process that they should be undertaking around how the curriculum is being taught and how it is being delivered. Very much to your point about laptops, very much about what technology are we using. An inspirational figure of mine, Conrad Wolfram of Wolfram Education, really is looking to try to reform education, particularly the maths curriculum, and move away from raw calculation and pen and paper, when most careers, industries, a lot of the work that's going on at university these days is computationally based and is about asking the right questions and interpreting the answers. And there should be some shift, I think, on a national level, to understand that the future of education is going to be about that, asking questions and interpreting answers, rather than so much in the way of calculation and that side of it. But we are in a very exciting time, and broadly speaking, the curriculum is very much suitable.
Thanks very much for that, Chris. I mean, this is an interesting discussion because I suspect most of the parents here are here, to try and work out where best to send their schools. But I think hearing from all three of you about how education is developing also gives an insight into how you're leaning in at your individual schools and adapting and being flexible. And I think one of the things that fascinates me most is this idea of how technology will change education. Not simply does your kid bring in a laptop or a tablet to school, but for me it seems odd that technology in theory should give you the opportunity to give effectively an individual curriculum to each child, to be able to monitor them that way. And that leads on to one elephant in the room, which I know you three want to get stuck into because you have slightly different views, which is if you think that technology is going to provide a sort of core individual curriculum to a child, what is the point of having this slightly crude thing called a GCSE at 16 and a slightly crude thing called an A-level where you sit for 3 hours and suddenly that's the conclusion of your education when you can be assessed all the way through? Jesse.
There are a lot of heads in the sector right now that are calling for big reforms of both GCSE and A-level and for the way in which students are assessed, and I think that's what you're getting at. I would just again promote the IB diploma, and one of the strengths of the IB diploma, which we offer in the sixth form, is in every subject, student does coursework as well as an exam, and in many subjects they have an oral exam as well. So even when exams were cancelled the last couple of years, it was less difficult for the IB because they had coursework for every student already, and they had some way to assess all of the students. So I think there already are different models out there of how you can assess students. I think things will change. One of the things I find odd is that most exams for most students are still handwritten, because there are very few professions where you actually sit down and do anything writing by hand.
Yeah. And
there's a challenge there for infrastructure at schools. How do we make sure we have students who all have access to a computer at a set period of time? But we can get there. We can put that in place. I think there's really interesting work in artificial intelligence, and I've already seen, I'm not going to name any companies, but I've already seen some online platforms that do tutoring using artificial intelligence. And by that I mean, so if you're doing maths and you're getting everything right, it gets harder and harder, so it immediately differentiates. What a good teacher would do in the classroom anyway, always stretching and extending and putting you at the right level, but you can already do that with AI, and that will be interesting to see how that influences education.
yes, you can answer the question, Jim.
Yeah, I am definitely one of those heads that thinks that we should. It would be a very welcome thing if the government looked again at GCSEs in particular. I think we should remember that GCSEs, or the very notion, or O-levels as they were back in the day, were established specifically as a school leavers exam. So, you know, that back in the day when children left school, a large number of children left school at 16, it was absolutely right to have some kind of summative assessment of what they had achieved, so that they leave with qualifications. But now all children stay at school until 18. So one of the major reasons for that assessment has gone. My experience of GCSEs on the whole is that there is a risk that they can, at just the point where you want children's minds to be opening and really flourishing with the sense of what is possible and what is out there, they, you know, at the age of 13, 14, can get really narrowed and restricted onto a curriculum. What is this for? What is the specification? Do I need to do this? So just the point where you want them, as Chris was saying, to be asking questions and having their mind open, there is a real risk of closing down and it becoming a very very process-driven 2 years of learning. So that is a real risk. And again, you have, you know, in all our schools, we will be doing things along the edges, along the side of GCSEs to keep that curiosity and that the minds open. But really, ideally, you want a curriculum for everybody that does do that. So that's the first thing I would say. And then the second thing, could not agree more about technology and the disruptive change that I think it could and should be bringing. And we are playing about with, and it is playing about at the moment, we are literally playing with VR and virtual reality and looking at what that can do to the way children learn. And it is absolutely wondrous. It is wonderful technology that is magical and can open doors. And what we want is for our children to have the opportunity to feel, I can just play with this. I can have a go. I can see what it's like. So that, and indeed AI as a way of assessing progress. So I think we should get rid of GCSEs. I actually think A-levels are worth keeping, particularly if they sit alongside, you have an EPQ or individual research dissertation project alongside them. But I think GCSEs we should replace with some kind of ongoing continuous assessment which is differentiated and makes use of the tools of AI to do that.
Great. Chris.
Thank you very much. And I, once again, find myself in broad agreement. I mean, I think that children learn best when they are feeling safe, they're feeling challenged, and they're happy. And all too often, entrance exams for entering other schools, terminal exams at GCSE are a source of anxiety, They can take up a disproportionate amount of curriculum time, and they're not, in my perspective, the best use of child development. Speaking more internationally, more globally, the UK tends to be a little bit of an outlier. Many countries internationally use continuous assessment. In America, you have grade point averages, you have other models to be able to assess student learning. We shouldn't go all the way down to that. I do agree that we should have a set of terminal exams at the end of year 13, whether those are the IB diploma exams that we offer at Fulham at Sevenoaks or A-levels elsewhere, because there are times in life where we are assessed at interview on a snapshot basis, and some exposure to that is important and worthwhile. But to not have any element of continuous assessment affecting the public record is, I do think it is a shortcoming of the system. That does need to adapt and to change, and less focus on examination, more focus on learning is probably a more sensible route forward in terms of child development overall.
Right, Chris, hold on to the microphone because I'm going to change the running order just to shake things up. Already we have a question, but I'm not going to take it because I'm enjoying myself too much at the moment. One of the things that might change the way you teach your children is what universities want, as it were. So it's perhaps harder for you to say we're not going to do A-levels or we're going to go to the IB because universities want something different. There are two questions that also stem from this. One is, as the heads of independent schools, do you think there is any truth in the narrative that is developing that universities are beginning to actively discriminate against independent schools? And secondly, could you ever see a scenario at your schools where you actively say to parents, you know, for this child, actually, an apprenticeship might be a great way forward as opposed to just straightforward university?
To your second question, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's absolutely critical for everyone involved, whether it's educators or parents, to acknowledge that students have strengths in different areas. Some were destined to be athletes, some were destined to go into performing arts, some are destined to go straight into careers that may not have been typically at the top of a very traditional academic ladder. And we're here to support students. I think, you know, good schools here are to support students flourish and thrive in the best way which is appropriate to them. And that is not always, strictly speaking, you know, going to Cambridge and Oxford, becoming doctors and lawyers. That's great for some, but it's not right for all. And that absolutely needs to be challenged. Sorry, could you repeat the first question as well?
Universities, to a certain extent, also have to modernise if independent schools are going to modernise. If the universities insist on just saying, we'll take the kids with 3 A stars, it actually narrows your room for manoeuvre.
Yes, to some extent. I mean, I do think that any presupposed discrimination against private schools is superficial at best. I think that students that do go to private schools, particularly independent schools, are often very well-rounded, stand themselves in very good stead. There has been some scrutiny over the past few years of universities looking at the percentages of students and where they've been going, and I think that, you know, some form of justice needs to still take place in that sphere. But and broadly, every revolution that we're talking about here, whether it's a digital revolution, it does need to be adapted. You know, if the government is talking about a skills gap, about difficulties in terms of employabilities, it's all well and good for secondary schools to be making greater use of technology, whether that be iPhones or laptops, etc. If only that did not continue in universities as well. So collaboration between secondary schools and higher education is paramount going forward.
Jane, do you want to?
Yes, thank you. So my experience with my children, both at university, absolutely is all online, and that isn't just because of COVID. It's so again, another very important reason, I think, to make sure that children are skilled up digitally. But to the material points of the question, emphatically, our job as educators is to take the amazing individuals that we have coming into our school, wonderful children, and to work with them to help them discover who they are and who they can be. That is the sacred mission of educators, and that is not therefore necessarily. I mean, Alleyn's is a highly selective academic school, and yet even in Alleyn's, that does not necessarily mean that every single child should be going to Oxford or Cambridge or Russell Group University. Very, very large numbers do, but that's not the goal. The goal is what is right for this individual. And again, a great privilege that we have at our school is time and resource to really find out about those individuals. And that is why this is literally the best job on the planet to do, because there's nothing more enjoyable than finding out about children and helping them find their thing and work out what they were put on earth to do. So that's the first thing I would say about that. And to the point about ratios and positive discrimination, our experience, certainly at Alleyn's and in my previous school as well, is that although actually it's true, absolutely, that and rightly, universities are completely focused on access and on improving social mobility, and so they should be, and everybody would support that. But in terms of our experience on the ground, it's still the case in my school anyway that the right people still do get the offers to Oxford and Cambridge, and so perhaps in the margins, the ones where it's a bit of a punt, perhaps less likely than in the past to get the offer, but the people who really should be going are still going, and we take great comfort for that, and I think that's how it should be, and it's fair, to be honest.
Great.
Yeah, I just echo Jane's point. I think it's right that universities are taking more students from state schools, and I'm conscious that we're at an independent school fair when I say that, but in recent years, at Oxbridge, you had 40% of students at Oxbridge from independent schools, when only 7% of the students in the country are at independent schools. So independent schools are overly represented at Oxbridge. That said, the top universities and the top employers want the best students, and the best students still get those places, and that's certainly been our experience. One thing that's been interesting at Sevenoaks is in recent years, more than 20% of our leavers have not even gone to university in the UK. Canada and North America, going to the US is a hugely popular destination. And last year I had a student turn down a place at Cambridge to go to Stanford, and I got it, and I was really supportive. And we also have students who might go to university in Europe or go to university in the Far East. I'm delighted that with our higher education department, I joke as a headmaster, I can't have a favorite department. I have to like every subject and every instrument in the orchestra, everything I have to like equally. But actually our higher education department at my school is the favorite. And I know we've got to help the students flourish in their journey and find out who they are, but actually the vast majority of our students and parents want their son or daughter still to go on to university, and I'm really pleased that we get about 90% of our students into their first choice university every year, and I know a lot of leading independent schools are doing the same thing, and your statistics will be similar, because that is a really important part of our job, is to help your son and daughter not just get into university, but be ready to flourish there and be employable as well.
It's a very good point about the US universities. Of course, US universities are eye-wateringly expensive, aren't they, Jane? And
they are, yeah.
So
there are scholarships?
Are independent schools going to be eye-wateringly expensive in 5 years, 10 years' time?
So I'll come to the Can I just one more point on the university? Sorry, Ed. I just wanted to also say that to that point about where you can come in as a school, I think it's absolutely also about challenging the kind of traditional, conventional thinking about what degree courses kids could be doing. And honestly, it is well worth at some point Googling the range of degree, I know it's a long way off probably for most of you, but the range of degree courses available now and the breadth. And so that's what I think a really good HE department in a school should be doing. It's not so much, yes, indeed, 90% of our kids will go to their first choice university and absolutely are rightly very academically ambitious, but it's actually channeling them to the more unusual or more exciting or just the more specific courses that might be right for them. And I think and the vast majority of university courses that you can study now were not even remotely thought of when parents were going to university. So I just want to say that.
So every time I look at the inflation figures, I think I can turn the thermostat down and put on an extra jumper, but I can't take my kids out of private school. Am I going to get a 10% increase in my fees next year? What will these guys be paying for their kids in 10 years' time?
Okay, so what I would say about that, obviously we're not allowed to talk about figures, Ed, you'll know that, but I think it would be a rash independent school that put their fees up by 10%, put it that way. I clearly, every single independent school in the country is absolutely aware of the affordability issue, really acutely aware of it, and well, I'm sure Jessie will talk about this, but independent schools don't run at a profit. We are charities, and we most of us don't have massive surpluses that we do exciting things with. We wash our face, basically. That's how we do it.
And there's an increasing emphasis, I think, now on raising money for bursaries as opposed to buildings.
Precisely. So diversity, inclusion, access are really critical. They're a critical part of any education, and perhaps one of the things that we might have talked about when we talked about the curriculum is how do you diversify the curriculum, but also how do you make sure that, certainly in particularly my school, our schools in London, a magnificent melting pot of a city, how do you make sure that it is representative, that the pupil, and the way you do it is through bursaries. 10% of the kids at our school are on life-changing bursaries, and we're incredibly proud of that. But we would love to double that, and we need to find ways to do that. That's about fundraising. That's not about fees.
I'm going to slightly change the subject. I'm going to allow you to be the spokesman on fees. Apart from Jesse, clearly wants to say that Sevenoaks is going to reduce its fees. No.
Independent schools are expensive, but they're a very, very good product.
Oh yes.
And you. The reason independent school fees have gone up significantly over the past 10 or 20 years is because the schools have gotten better. The independent school of 30 or 40 years ago didn't have to be inspected in the same way schools now. They weren't as compliant with everything from Legionella to electrical safety. They weren't safe places to be in terms of health and safety. I'm a school inspector now. In fact, a few years ago, I inspected Jane's school, and it was fabulous. She's a great head. I recommend it.
She wasn't there when you inspected it. She wasn't there when you expected it,
But I can tell you, it's a very rigorous inspection where we're even looking at the access to safe drinking water, to the lighting when the school gets dark. Everything is covered. So, and schools, most independent schools here are charities, and you can read their accounts. They don't make a big profit, and any profit they do make, they reinvest back in the school. And the benchmark in the sector is most schools run about a 10% surplus, and then they put that back into the resources because their buildings are depreciating all the time.
I want to.
So you can cut me off, but
I'm cutting you off. I've got
and also to say there are free and assisted places if it's too expensive for
I've got to keep this moving along. So I want to talk. I'm going to ask my last question because I know the audience here, a group of experts, want to ask their questions. But I just want to talk. My last question is about climate change. I'm going to ask Chris to start off because he's been left out of the last session. I know that Jane has been to COP, and I know that Jesse has a lot to say about his ambitions for Sevenoaks in terms of climate change. But Chris comes from Alaska, so we might as well start with him. I mean, you are on the front line of climate change, or at least your family is. So climate change and net zero is clearly going to be an issue for independent schools, as it is for all of us. So I'd just love to get your perspectives very quickly.
I mean, it's something that we need to target aggressively. And I would say so aggressively, radically aggressively is absolutely key here. And I know Jane will talk a little bit about COP, but what we've seen, I think, the biggest danger, I think, to independent schools is actually a lack of trust, particularly from young people who would be looking to come to the school, who feel that for some reason that they couldn't place their faith properly in education. The main areas I think that there would be a lack of trust recently would be around the environment and climate change. And then large policy errors, things like the algorithm that went wrong a year ago when it came to the awarding of grades. Schools should be leaders in this area. They absolutely need to be pushing this forward and setting an example, not because that's what we do. Schools set an example to communities, to parents, to students in terms of, in ways that will shape them for the rest of their life. They are judged by everyone, not just the communities that attend those schools. And where talks may break down on a political level, I think independent schools are in a prime position to be able to set a great example for what net zero can be and what climate can change, and how they can contribute to this existential crisis and this problem that we're all facing to some extent. It wouldn't be without its challenges. It's monumental, and how we bring that down is still, there's lots to be debated at that. I mean, talking the difference between recycling and emissions and the impact, you could be at it for hours. But I know that independent schools are, my school particularly, all schools are leading the way with climate committees and are reviewing this in depth and finding modern ways of dealing with it.
Jane, you were at COP. What did you say to people?
Yeah, it was amazing experience. And actually, I think I was asked to talk about what should education, how should we educate for the climate emergency? And I do think the answer is very much the sort of things that we've been talking about on this panel already, which is that we need, of course our children need to know it. I mean, and actually most teenagers are aware of, of the issue, and many of them are, really activated and really passionate about it in a way that I have not seen before in my professional life. And that's incredibly exciting. but making sure that they've got really, rich evidence knowledge behind the feeling, behind the passion. That's important, point number one. And point number two is that we should no longer, we need to make sure that climate information is no longer just on the margins of science, the science GCSE syllabus, or the geography GCSE. It was covered a little bit here. All subjects ought to be addressing it one way or another through the curriculum. And critically, again, those interdisciplinary courses, those cross-discipline courses that encourage problem solving, research skills, creative thought, collaboration, and also how to influence change. That seems to me what we ought to be talking about, and we ought to be teaching. And certainly, again, we've developed programs at Alleyn to do just that, because there's a wonderful bill going through Parliament right now, which is by Lord Jim Knight. You're probably aware of it, the Education Sustainable Education Bill. And he said in his speech presenting the bill to the House of Lords, one of the phrases he used was, "In the near future, every job will be a green job." And in fact, I'm not even sure that we're not there now. It's absolutely true. All of us, it doesn't matter, it used to be that it would just be the scientists who deal with that. Now everyone has to think about, what does this mean in terms of climate and our response to it. So it is completely pertinent, it's absolutely universal, and we really do need to have some really good solutions, creative thinking. And if I made just one final point, what I thought when I went to, I was totally uncool when I got the invitation. I was so excited to be invited. But when I thought I might see lots of very anxious people or very stressed out people. Actually, what I found was a whole load of really young, highly motivated, really creative, and really inspiring people, young people who want to make a difference and already are making a difference and having impact. And I thought, wow, actually, the future is in safe hands. I felt really, really positive about it.
Brilliant. Jesse, you've got some exciting plans for Sevenoaks.
Yes, 2032, 10 years from now, is our 600th anniversary of Sevenoaks School. And we're shortly going to announce, this is a little bit of a teaser, we're shortly going to announce that we will be carbon neutral by 2032 and working very with a detailed plan on how to get there. But that's not about a marketing thing. What we actually want to do is learn from schools and universities that are already there. LSE just won an award for being one of the first carbon neutral university in the UK. We're going to work with those other, and the point is to try to bring other schools and universities along as well on this journey, and making sure the students are part of that as well. And also in 2032, I want to have a big endowment for more free and assisted places, because actually going carbon neutral will be a bit more expensive as well. And so we need to be offering free and assisted places alongside the fees that we make some parents like Ed pay.